As far as I'm concerned, as long as that same respect and recognition is not shown toward every one of our people in this country, it doesn't exist for me. And during the few moments that we have left, we want to have just an off-the-cuff chat between you and me, us. We want to talk right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand.
Welcome back to another episode, Malcolm Effect. And this episode is something I've been meaning to do for quite some time. And it comes at a great time thinking about the UK. Given that I'm based now in the United States, oftentimes the themes or the things that I'm attached to or commentating on politically pertains to North America. But I can't forget home. I can't forget the roots. And I thought about this episode. I'm glad that we have the guests that we do to speak to us about the types of repression those who are in solidarity with Palestine in the UK are facing. This is a jam-packed show, probably the most guests I've ever had on one show. So I'll just say welcome to the Malcolm Effect. Tara, Abel, Haya, Alex. How's it going?
Yo, what's good?
Thank you for having us.
Hey.
You know, it feels so good to hear. When I heard Abel to say what's good, I was like, oh, what a London accent. It's been a while. It's been a while since I had a good old London accent. So welcome.
We'll bring you right back to that Babylon, isn't it?
Okay, so let's just go straight into it. What the hell is going on in UK campuses? I know we're going to speak specifically about SOAS, but what has the solidarity movement look like thus far? What is happening? What has happened? And where are we at now? Anyone can take the question.
I can take that, I don't mind. So the student movement has been really incredible the last year. Obviously, we know there's been the genocide in Gaza and in all of Palestine that's been going on for over 14 months now. But the solidarity has genuinely been incredible. I don't think the student movement has been this big in a very, very long time. The wave of encampments were really a very important moment in time in the student movement to politicize students and to actually prepare them for the new academic year. For example, for us at SOAS, I feel as though a lot of people have come to visit our encampments as postgrads, but also as freshers, of course. And they said that they were seeing the encampment and the work that was being done. And now we have a lot of them organizing with us. We had a really cool freshers protest on the last day of Freshers Week, where lots of students came out to support and to learn about SOAS's complicity, because they're complicit in over 6 million pounds in companies that invest in the genocide and settler colonialism of the Palestinian people. I think across all universities, I mean, we have a lot of comrades from LSE, UCL, KCL, comrades from outside of London as well. It's been really incredible to see their work as well and to see how the student movement has really become a massive phenomenon, and that this is only the beginning of a very, very important chapter within the student movement. And we take lessons from other struggles, like during apartheid South Africa, or the Vietnam War in the 60s, when, for example, Colombia had their occupation. We learn a lot of lessons and we connect our student movement through the work of others as well. But I think at SOAS, it's really been a very incredible feeling to see that so many students are becoming more and more involved every single day and are wanting to organize with us.
Thank you. Does anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Yeah, I think obviously like it's been a year of learning, and I think as Haya says, it's really incredible to see people start to pick up from. I guess like when October hit last year, I think we all saw the Palestinian resistance. We've known this in it, but it made very clear that Palestinian resistance was steps ahead of everyone else in terms of being ready to take on imperialism. So I think it's been a year of people, I think, taking the lead from that resistance, but also like starting to think about how we apply it in our context and how we identify the complicity of our institutions, and like I see our responsibility to take them on and fight them. So as Haya said, like calling for the divestment from the universities, but also the ways that they kind of continue to legitimize and sort of give that ideological support to Zionism as well. So, for example, you've got, I mean, this happens in a lot of universities. Other places, they've got maybe more obvious and direct links, where, for example, Uni of Leicester is like manufacturing for Rolls-Royce or BAE Systems, different universities have these sort of like industrial partnerships. SOAS is obviously quite a specific university where it's, sort of one was sort of like the colonial institution and then went through this rebrand in the 50s, 60s, where it sort of now sort of spouts this decolonial education kind of idea. But yeah, actually still they actually play a very, I think, quite insidious role of continuing to legitimize the Zionist project. So one of the ways is they actually they have a partnership, like a university partnership with Haifa University, which is pretty disgusting, frankly. And all the more so because it comes from a university that calls itself decolonial. So yeah, I mean Haifa University we can see very specifically is horrific because of not only being built on stolen land, but also then goes on to train IOF soldiers who, out here committing war crimes and somehow getting a university degree at the same time. And that university is legitimized by SOAS. But actually, we say it's, of course, Haifa is particularly bad. But the fact that they would partner with any Israeli institution is, just not on really because it's not on because of how can you call yourself a decolonial education here or you're legitimizing a settler colony? Yes, it's a big part of our campaign is to break that partnership.
Yeah, I mean, so many people, what decolonization is a metaphor then, right? Because I think what has been abundantly clear, and I've constantly been saying this, is that Palestine, the question of Palestine, holds up a mirror to society, and specifically, particular, holds up a mirror to our institutions, right? Like fundamentally asking questions about, okay, these institutions that will have claim to be decolonial, will claim to be radical progressive, will have phenomenon the syllabus in some places, etc., etc. But when push comes to shove, they're all too often going to capitulate to donors and to their investments over issues of the day, right? And that's been this case we've seen on all other campuses. But I do find it, I don't know, it makes me laugh to hear that. Laugh and also very sad because SOAS, School of African or Eastern Studies, but also like SOAS has the branding. Those of us who are going to be a bit radical. When I was thinking of going to university, I was thinking, okay, I want to do politics, I want to be political. Like, all those want to be radical, those who want to like have some kind of involvement in the real world in terms of changing things and moving things. They think SOAS is often an option. So you mean to tell me the branding is just what fake?
That's why it's so frustrating because it reiterates the capitalist world that we live in and sort of the corporate greed of these institutions because they will use, I mean, for me personally, I always say that one of the reasons I like the main reason I wanted to go to SOAS was because of the so-called decolonial rhetoric they were putting out and the things I've heard about the activism that goes on at SOAS, which the activism is still strong. I mean, you can see people like us are still organizing and there's an important organizing aspect of SOAS that will always be there. But in terms of the education, it's frustrating for us as students to sit down and see everything from just a historical lens or just this one perspective of all of these decolonization, all of them are just academic theories when they're really not. We learn lessons from history, we learn lessons from the past. We look at these theories because it's our job, it's our responsibility to actually enforce it in our everyday lives. So as just lure students in with a false illusion of this so-called reputation, and then once they're there, they don't actually give them that chance to have that freedom of thought and to formulate their own thoughts. Again, like all other institutions, which is what SOAS is trying to be, it's trying to turn itself like these other corporate unis like UCL and LSE and KCL. It's limiting freedom of thought, it's limiting freedom of political thought, which is why it's really important that students are not only organizing on and off campus, but also speaking up inside their lectures, their seminars, and ensuring that they are paving the way, that we are paving the way for an education, for an institution that we want it to be.
Alex, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what everyone was saying. I think you both put it really well. I think the idea of the university as a real site of struggle This is something that I think PYM recently put a statement out about this that was talking about the university as a node in a global settler colonial machine. And I think that mistake that we can sometimes fall into, what's great about this moment, if we're going to look at a silver lining, is as Haya and folks said, people are being politicized and they're realizing it isn't an abstract thing. It's not just that people sympathize with folks halfway across the globe or something. Many people at SOAS have family members, have direct links, friends, comrades with what is going on in Palestine and Gaza, but also that it is a material network that provides, not just ideological cover, but actual material links with, as Abel said, Haifa University, companies that are profiting from the occupation. And so it makes me think of, we're talking about the larger context. I think in the UK right now, the British state and British universities are facing such a crisis because I think, like in many moments in history, they're realizing that their criminal liability is becoming so extreme that they're not really sure what to do. I know organizations in the UK like Christmas, Liberty, a bunch of different organizations have sent letters of concern to universities, not only for their actual investments, but also for the reaction that they're having to students like Haya, Tara, and Abel in particular, who've been speaking up and have faced massive repression. And so I think sort of the bigger picture where I'm seeing it is, as someone who's been in the UK kind of complaining about things for a little while, I think we're seeing the extension of the hostile environment and the abuse of counter-terror legislation and this kind of moral panic against encampments, against the protests, against anybody who speaks up, basically to try and silence this movement. But it isn't working. It isn't working, but they are trying to slow us down. So I think thinking about at our own university, we had these conversations about the prevent duty, which is still on the books. I mean, students and staff and any people who speak up about the genocide are potentially facing quite serious consequences far beyond just their studies, but also in terms of being labeled as terrorists, being labeled as contrary to fundamental British values. And I think I can leave it there, but I think we've had some great victories in the UK recently. There's a Palestinian student, Dana Abu Qamar, who was able to defeat some of these specious charges, but they're really ratcheting up that pressure. And I think it's because of what you all said, that these are direct material links and they're not abstract links at all.
Exactly. And I think these institutions are facing a crisis of legitimacy as well, because again, how is it on the one hand you talk about being these bastions of free learning, of free speech and learning and challenging society to push the conversation forward, but they're coming hard down on their students in such incredibly repressive ways. I mean, we've seen the images from the United States. So I want to speak about the specifics of SOAS. What has been the repression like? Because I think in the US it's interesting because we've seen examples of police officers holding snipers at students. We've seen the pummeling to the ground of faculty. I've seen the several arrests being made, the camps being swept in the most violent ways in the US. What has been, for those of you specifically, what has been the case at SOAS specifically? And also if we know of any other stories of repression, maybe you can tell the listeners as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to compare the US and the UK because I think sort of state violence and institutional violence in the UK has always been a little bit more covert and less in your face than it is in America, but that doesn't make it any less violent, if you see what I mean. So the sort of form that the repression has taken here in the UK has very much been to target individuals and make an example of them in order to create this sort of chilling effect and silence the rest of both the entire population, but obviously specifically on campuses, the student bodies. And SOAS has sort of taken that up and really, really run with it. And to be honest, it started even before the wave of encampments where we saw a sort of uptick in repression in response to a huge outbreak of the movement. But at SOAS, literally 7 students were suspended after the first protest on campus after the genocide started. And so this was the context in which we went into the encampment with the understanding that SOAS was very willing to repress pro-Palestinian voices. And so they've only sort of continued that campaign. So me and Haya both suspended from campus for 6 months. Abel has been permanently excluded, and both Abel and Alex were dismissed from their jobs in the Students' Union on their first day of work, jobs that we as a student body elected them into. And they're using this sort of strategy of targeting individuals in order to scare the rest of the student body, because particularly at SOAS, they do want to maintain this reputation of sort of being a space for the more radical students to attend. So they don't want to outwardly say that they are, against protests or any of this. In fact, the opposite. They say in all of their communication that they want to uphold freedom of speech while at the same time punishing students who dare to speak out against the genocide or against the university management in any way. And that's recently escalated into a court case, which the University of London has taken me, Haya, and Abel, and an all-encompassing persons unknown to court in order to criminalize protest on campus. And so we can see that it's sort of stepping beyond the boundaries of just academic sanctions and actually moving into a space where we can see that they're fully trying to make it a crime to raise your voice on campus, particularly to do with anything for Palestine.
Anyone else want to add to that? The ways in which SOAS has mobilized or other stories in the UK in terms of as it comes to repression and the Palestinian movement?
Yes, I wanted to talk about state violence but like by the police. So actually on the 9th of July, we had two Zionists who came to provoke the camp at 1 a.m. And these are two well-known Zionists. Actually, two of them were arrested before, I'm pretty sure, for anti-Semitism. And they were really obviously racist, Islamophobic, go back to your country, like all of these things. And they called the police, made up all these false allegations about us, and the police decided to side with them. So it escalated quite a lot, and students and other members of the encampment, my mom was there as well, were brutalized by police, and 7 of us were arrested. My brother Ali is actually going to court at the end of the month, and my friend Ebru is going to court in 2026. So there's also sort of this wider state violence as well that's been happening here. Even if you look at Palestine action groups who do incredible work like that, they're being put into prison on false allegations of terrorism charges, and they're really trying to crack down on the entire movement. For example, when Zionists are arrested, they'll be released after 2 hours, but most Palestine protesters are held for over 24 hours. So you can really see the underlying, or it's actually not underlying, it's very much an obvious Zionist agenda, and how there's a double standard whenever it comes to Palestine, which is it's rooted in multiple different, issues within British society. But also there's the double standard of, we can speak about other issues like Russia and Ukraine, but limit any conversation when it comes to Palestine, because obviously we know Britain was literally the ones who signed the Balfour Declaration, and they're trying to limit any conversation that not only students can have, but the state is having on Palestine, because they're literally supporting the Zionist entity by sending arms, by letting through, the F-31 fighter jets, things like that. And anyone who speaks up or does these actions, like groups like Palestine Actions, will get severely sanctioned for no reason whatsoever. And there's also been a precedent of repression at other universities as well. There's been suspensions at UCL, at LSE. There's been 17 arrests in Oxford. So it's clearly very much a pattern that the state is putting out to try to silence not only the student movement, but the pro-Palestine movement in general. But what's been amazing is that we are the majority. We will continue to be the majority, and the support for Palestine has gone up so much, and it hasn't. People's opinions are shifting a lot. Even those who once said, "Oh, I want a two-state solution," are now saying they want a one-state, and now have become politicized and have realized that that is the only way to go forward, basically, and to not only call for a ceasefire, but to end the occupation as a whole, and to call for a free Palestine from the river to the sea.
Okay, no, absolutely, absolutely. And Zionism has been exposed for what it is, a brutal settler colonial ideology which is deeply racist, and it continues to be exposed. And I don't think they will be ever able to rehabilitate, because again, even though regardless of what Western media says or legacy media says, the global majority clearly is on the side of Palestinians, and we're seeing time and time again as Zionists continue to go throughout the world, they're going to be shamed, and rightfully so. So, again, bringing back to what's happening with you folks specifically, right? What should we know, for those that are listening, what should we know about what's happening on the ground with you guys' cases, or what's happening in SOAS? I know we spoke about the student union involvement, and how you were fired from these positions. Like, speak to us what's happening with you particular cases. Anyone can take the question.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I mean, on the ground, I mean, I think obviously the one thing is to say, look, like, it's not so specific to our situation, so as, but like, there is maybe, I know you see in some places in the movement, of course, like, media stops covering stuff as much. I know people in the movement are very strong at keeping their eyes on a situation in Palestine. I think that has to be the number one starting point in terms of, like, constantly having a reference point of being the ongoing situation on the ground. Obviously, it's not like the, like, continuing massacres, it only shows us more clearly why we need to keep escalating seriously our action in our organization here. So yeah, for SOAS, I think one thing to be very careful of as well. So as we've talked about, SOAS has a kind of, it keeps this image of being the progressive one, of being, I suppose some people see it as the most pro-Palestine university in the UK. It has a Centre for Palestine Studies. And to some extent, it's true in terms of they give this very limited coverage to Palestine. That is the image of the university. But I think actually there's also a bit of a reaction now because of the way they've been exposed, the university, and they've been shamed because when, as we said, when push comes to shove, they've, suspended people for speaking out. They've, brutalized students on campus. Because they've been exposed in that way, there's a bit of a reaction now where, and this is actually one thing we've got to be careful of, it even comes from academic staff as well, because academic staff, do have a relative, position of comfort within the system. Whereas even if they, supposedly have more radical or call themselves decolonial academics, their status as well relies on the universities being legitimized as, institutions of knowledge and education. And so whereas we're exposing these institutions as actually, quite authoritarian and institutions of compliance, they actually want to defend. There's a movement, of people who want to defend the university's image a bit in a way. So people are starting so as to say, oh, well, trying to claim the easy wins, trying to say, oh, well, they have, this money moved out of this company. And so, for example, what's happened with SOAS's investments is they've moved money out of some of the companies we call it divestment from, and they've been put the money into other investments. So like money's come out of Barclays and it's gone into Amazon, and then people will go, wow, amazing, divestment. And we're just to be like, hold on. Like, what does this serve, like I always go back to Cabral, tell no lies, claim no easy victories. It's like you can't, I think we've got to be very careful about, trying to claim wins that will actually just protect the image of the university and make people sort of feel good when it's about question of power in the university, isn't it, really? We've got like the demands there like remain very live campaigns. And then the issues that have come up around the repression, I think, is like really important to be able to actually win the right to be able to keep speaking out in the university. So absolutely to get Tara and Haya reinstated and like to beat their suspensions. I know they're going through the kind of official appeals process in the university, but the extent that process, I haven't been through it myself. I know they don't really take their process seriously. It's the most important thing is pressure from the outside. And then myself and Alex as well, trying to get reinstated back into the students' union. And that's, I guess, a real question of actually, do we have a democratic students' union? We were elected into there, and then, some people from management stepped in and said, hey, wait a minute, we don't like what you're saying. You can't take the jobs, essentially. So we're taking them to employment tribunal. Maybe, Alex, you want to speak a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. I was going to offer to jump in and say the Wikipedia page for BDS, if you look it up, it's a picture of SOAS. That surprised me. I saw that the other day. And I think you're absolutely right, Abel, that like what's happening at SOAS is that there's kind of people are so tired and so maybe pseudo traumatized by all the repression that we even have these kind of halfway victories and people saying, well, at least if we get something, it's better than nothing, right? But just to transition into this, I would say the question I would ask to exactly those staff, those people in the institution who are so afraid of even speaking the name of the abusers who are, harassing and intimidating and expelling students and harassing workers is what does it mean if we get to victory and half of our comrades are missing? Can we even get to victory if half of our comrades are missing? And so I think, from where we're sitting, there's various layers to this, but for the student union part of it, student unions in the UK were originally founded to be like trade unions. The idea was to be a counterbalance to the university so that they could push the university against discriminatory behavior for students' rights, for workers' rights. They were important during the anti-apartheid movement. And I think, we shouldn't get lost, I think, as Abel was also saying, in the respectability politics of the university, as though it all begins and ends with student unions. But I do think it's revealing the extent to which it's so taken for granted that management and of the university and management of the student union are one and the same, that even the pretense of some kind of critique faces such repression. So basically, Abel and I are taking the SU to an employment tribunal, and we've actually added the university to that complaint as well, on advice from our barrister, because we believe a data privacy breach happened between the university and our employer, the Students' Union, because they cited our disciplinary procedures for protests around Palestine in our dismissals. And we're going to be, arguing, amongst other things, that our anti-Zionist beliefs were discriminated against. And I think there that the angle, sort of, again, as we said earlier, it's less about us as individuals, right? It's more about the precedent that is being set. So in the UK, a precedent was set because of Professor David Miller and his wrongful sacking, where they proved if his case that anti-Zionist beliefs are protected under the Equality Act 2010. And this is a huge kind of bulwark and protection for workers in other places, right? So I guess maybe to just bring it back, whether we win our case or not, and I think we will, but whether we win or not, it's not going to stop us from fighting. It's not going to stop us from, protesting and in all our various ways, in the movement. But I do think it brings me back to, again, thinking about easy victories. Someone I look up to a lot, Miriam Kaba, talks about reformist reforms and abolitionist reforms. And sometimes I think we confuse the two. So I think there's some staff and students at SOAS who are so honestly traumatized and scared, because we've talked to students who are afraid to say anything because they think if they put their name on a signature on a petition, or if they say something, they're going to immediately go to prison, right? But I think this idea of let's just take what we can without thinking about the long term. Sometimes a compromise has abolition in mind, and so it's worth taking. But sometimes a compromise is just a compromise. Sometimes it's compromising your values. And I think what we're seeing is quite a cynical exploitation of that by the university and by the SU, which is very happy to run us through our cases until our contracts are over and then run another election the next year. But I think, what it's really about is if we had an SU that was functioning properly, we would be 24/7 round the clock trying to get our suspended and expelled students back. And that's not what's happening right now. So by hook or by crook, I think listeners have to think and ask themselves, why is that the case? And why is it so hard for the adults in the room, quote unquote, to believe students, to believe people when they're sounding the alarm and saying, we are being brutalized? It's important for, sorry, I'm rambling here.
I just think you're spitting.
I think it's just, we all know we came in on this campaign that was a really radical campaign, and we had a lot of pledges that we committed to, and we still are committed to. And I think we all know what a fighting student union would look like, and what a fighting movement that would traverse this university and break it from the inside, what that would look like. That's not what's happening right now. And I think I can say with 100% confidence, I spoke to staff just last week who said point blank, it's because they're afraid of the VC. And the VC, if we haven't said it yet, I think Haya did, is Adam Habib. So people are so afraid of naming the VC of our university that it's causing us to sort of do these false compromises. But I remain hopeful. That's what I'll end by saying. I remain hopeful. I think it's important to highlight that stuff.
And I think what has been eye-opening for me, seeing what's happening in your cases and also in several other universities, has been, and I guess perhaps it was a naivety on my part, but the ways in which these institutions will subvert and ignore and misconstrue their own processes. And I've found all too often these issues of due process and the rules in which they set themselves, even as big as their own divestment guidelines that they created, to the student code of conduct process within the university and the internal processes, when push comes to shove, these things are just mere formalities. And these things, because they're going to do what the fuck they want. And they've continued to show that they're going to do what the fuck they want at the end of the day. They're going to deal with people and continue to capitulate to their donors. And that is who they're going to put at the expense of their students. And that's been the case here anyway, that I've seen that call now. Okay, cool. So I know, okay, let me just take the tiny step. Haya's, I think their internet is messing up. But we're like, we've got another 10, 15 minutes left usually, 20 minutes possibly. Anything else you guys want to include or ask?
I think what you were just saying was actually really interesting because, as you mentioned earlier, like people say that the sort of Palestine holds up a mirror
One
to.
second. Do I want this to be a question, or do you want to say this as a response, or do you want to just talk about it?
Well, I was just going to talk about what you were saying about like institutions not following their due process and what we can learn from that as a movement. Because I think like what you were saying about how Palestine holds up a mirror, this has been really obvious that these due processes around whatever it may be, the disciplinary process or the workers dismissal processes or whatever it is, as you said, are mere formalities and are there to uphold the interests of the institution itself. But I think that actually this has been a positive thing that has come out of all of this repression that we've seen, is that a mirror has been held up and it has been made clear to everyone that the processes within these institutions are never going to serve the interests of the movement or even the interests of the student body in general. And I think that we can actually see this as a positive because it pushes us to acknowledge that where we get justice is within our movement and is within what we're building on a grassroots level. And I think that it's actually really helped to shine a light on the fact that that whether it's the courts or the university disciplinary process, this is not where we should be looking when we're trying to look for justice, when we're trying to fight for justice. That actually, if we're trying to fight these systems of repression, it has to be through our own organizing and through a real political pushback, in the streets, in the workplaces, on our campuses. And that has to come from our own organizing, and that we just can't continue to look to these institutionalized processes.
Absolutely. But is there anything else you want me to cover or bring up? Anything else?
What do you guys think, Abel, there?
There's an aspect of things which is, less around the repression. Oh, hi, it's back. Nice. Less around the repression, but more, I guess, in terms of this question over education and what's been, I guess, come out of this experience of the encampments. And I think maybe one thing, I think like all, struggles and like campaigns that we're in is like an educational in ways that go way beyond the way that like a traditional classroom education can teach us. I think particularly because of, as we were saying earlier, the situation in UK is different, like how camps got more time before they got shut down. And what that allowed to open up was, the space to actually, one, make connections with people on the ground in Gaza, and two, for people to sort of, I guess, start to create a mindset that, like, as students, like, sure, we're fighting against our universities for their sort of institutional complicity, but also we call out the miseducation that we're getting, and like actually realize if we need to find out ourselves. Like we need to like do the work to learn directly, like see the resistance as the educational, the educational authority actually that we should really
we can just first of all, I think there's like mad background noise where you are.
Yeah, sorry, someone's just sorting the room out.
Okay, cool. No worries. I think I want to go into the sorts of tactics that we've seen in terms of like the repression, but also the anti-repression as well. Haya, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, I wanted to mention that there's something called an anti-protest policy at SOAS, which I haven't seen other universities, but this policy states that one of its things is that we can't target members of the SOAS executive board or those in authority accountable, which is ridiculous because if you think about it, we're suspended for one of the reasons being holding these members accountable not only for the repression and limitation on freedom of speech on campus, but for their complicity in the genocide. We're allowed to do that with the government and Keir Starmer and in the marches, and we're allowed to hold them accountable. But the fact that the executive board at SOAS, people like Adam Habib, believe that they are above the law and that they can treat students and repress students that way is absolutely ridiculous and shows further the authoritarian nature of the institution. Also, the fact that there's an anti-protest policy in the first place and that there's limitations on protest, because permission to protest is not freedom to protest, and that's really important to know. But it also shows that the fact that they're making these regulations stronger, or that the University of London took us to court, is only a testament to how strong our movement is, and that this is actually a win, because they see us, they're intimidated by us, and that just, yeah, they're basically threatened by their own students. And it shows that our pressure, our power, our collective power is working in order to end this university's repression on freedom of speech, to do with Palestine, and to also end their complicity as well. And I thought that was important to mention, because clearly the law like this doesn't apply to everyone. Because why is it that Adam Habib is allowing the suspensions of these students and is expelling them, whilst in the wider context, with the wider, protests that happen, we're allowed to say what we want about the government? And also the fact that them targeting a few students, or visible students, or those in the movement, they're trying to sort of intimidate the entire student body. So they're not just attacking Tara, Abel, Alex, and I as individuals, but this is a scare tactic for the wider student body. But we've seen that they're failing, because the majority of the student body do stand with Palestine. The majority of the student body have been wanting to get organized with us, which is amazing to see as well.
It's a strange kind of back and forth, right? It's this dialectical relationship where what we're finding is the more the universities and institutions repress pro-Palestinian speech and repress pro-Palestinian advocacy, you're finding that more it produces more and more people in solidarity, right? So yeah, it is not clearly not working out in the ways they think it will. And I guess as we're approaching the end of the episode, what do you think? And I think Abel spoke about this briefly. What do you think about like the time of the encampment, and it's kind of like this idea of like a liberated zone and taking back education and really calling into question the legitimacy of the university? What do you think are some of the things that we learned from the encampment, and guess speaking to like the role of education and education more generally?
Yeah, I think this was, one of the it was a big takeaway as well. Like, of course, we saw the repression, but in terms of our role, and especially considering ourselves as students, like what is the aspect, like what happens to our education amongst all of this? When you got universities which are obviously so entangled and committed to upholding, Zionism and imperialism, like how do we go forwards and keep learning as students? I think the liberated zone for Gaza, SOAS, and like the other encampments, especially the UK, because they actually got to settle for a little bit. Did start to push those questions of what happens when we take education back to like linking education to a cause for liberation. So of course people look back to Paulo Freire, these people and ideas, and maybe we're not quite in such revolutionary times, we don't feel it as those ideas were built from. But I think there's still a lot we can do. People are obviously very drawn towards the cause, like the Palestinian liberation cause, and it's not. Of course, there's an aspect of we see atrocities, we see genocide taking place, but I think we also see like the utmost dignity and like the fact that the Palestinian people in their struggle have shown more educational authority than any of these so-called decolonial lecturers have shown. And of course, there's a mixture of that. There's the element that academics and teachers in universities feel constrained in maybe what they can talk about because of the risk of getting a backlash and the lack, like their insecurity in their workplace positions. But that kind of fear becomes institutionalized. And there's also the element of that there's people teaching in these universities who, alongside their teaching, they're also are part of producing the knowledge of someone that we were just talking before. There's someone doing a talk at SOAS tonight, and she is she's a teacher in politics and diplomacy at SOAS, and she's running like the America Center at Chatham House, like a big part of like British imperialism and from the way they build their foreign policy. So I think it's about realizing that we can actually start to build our education directly with people and like learning directly from people in resistance, recognizing their like actual authority to speak on these questions. I think Haya probably said decolonization is not a metaphor, and I think we can learn from the people doing it. I had another comrade who said, SOAS will come in, SOAS will sell Palestinian culture, Palestinian history. They sell it as an academic commodity, but when it comes to the actual resistance that is ongoing on the ground, they want to suppress it. I think that's our job. Is like, they can sell us all these sort of sanitized elements of cultural resistance, but there's actually a very current struggle going on, and it's up to us to connect to that directly, not through the institution.
Thank you.
Can I add? I just wanted to say as well, like truly, if you go back and you look at the videos, you see what went on. I think the SOAS liberated zone, they're all the liberated zones were amazing, but there was some of the most impressive, beautiful, challenging, wonderful organizing happening in that space, which belies all the dog whistle university and police statements about, oh, there's dangerous undesirables and there's criminals, there's all kinds of people that are scary from the outside here. I think one thing that we know, as Abel just highlighted, is that, for example, in the United States, there literally would be no ethnic studies programs. There would be no radical departments at all, even in the compromised way that they exist, without the movements that built outside and underneath the university, in the undercommons, in Fred Moten's words, to make those things a reality in the first place. And I think what I saw as somebody who had the privilege of participating to a certain extent until I had to leave for my study abroad program was really just every day the connections being made, the different movements coming together, people creatively coming up with ways to intervene sort of in between and beyond these institutions. It really shows, I think also, yeah, as Tara said, that like we don't have to wait for these institutions to build some, these aspects of the world that we want to see. I remember very early on a very simple victory. Disabled students. I was in the Disabled Student Society on the committee. For years, we've been trying to get accessibility on campus, and it took the SOAS Liberated Zone encampment for us to work with disabled people against the cuts to build a ramp onto the green, which just so that people with wheelchairs, walkers, and et cetera could even physically enter into that space. And something like that might seem like a small act, but I think, I can't sum it up in words. I don't think anyone can, but there's 1,000,001 of these small moments of solidarity that came together in that space that no matter what the repression, I think, yeah, there's really important lessons from that. And that is going to be, I think, the legacy that SOAS will eventually want to capitalize on and say that, oh, these students, you're going to see Abel and Tara's face in a catalog in the future. And they're going to claim that, oh, these were the vanguard, the conscience of the generations. But there is, I think there was a really powerful, beautiful moments of solidarity despite all the difficulty happening there. And I still have hope for that.
Thank you so much. And any final thoughts before we wrap up?
That was a beautiful note to end on.
Okay, dope. Thank you so much. I'm going to put the social media of the groups, some of the groups we spoke about, some of the organizations on the ground, particularly as it pertains to SOAS and other London-based groups. Please, guys, listeners, support, amplify, get involved. If those of you who are listening from the UK specifically, and also abroad as well, there will be ways to get involved and support. The more that we show support and the more that we defy these institutions, given how repressive they are, continues to show strength, continues to show the strength of our movements, but first and foremost, and fundamentally, we are reminded that what the Palestinian resistance is up against and continues to be up against, and so heroically defends their land and their cause, what we are going through pales in comparison. And the very least we can do is persevere. So until next time, peace out.